There's a moment that every empath dreads. The moment when someone they love is drowning in their own chaos, and for the first time, the empath doesn't dive in to save them. They stand on the shore, heart pounding, watching, not because they don't care, but because they finally understand something that Carl Jung spent decades trying to teach the world. You cannot heal someone by carrying their wounds for them, and the empath who discovers this truth doesn't become heartless. They become free. Jung wrote something that most people misunderstand. He said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But here's what he didn't say out loud, what he observed quietly in his clinical work with highly sensitive souls. The empath never chooses to become a fixer. They're conditioned into it, traumatized into it, survival trained to believe that their value exists only in their usefulness to others' pain. Let me paint you a picture of what I call the empath's breaking point. You've just spent 3 hours on the phone with someone who's having the same crisis they had last month, and the month before that. You've given advice they won't take. You've offered solutions they won't try. You've absorbed their anxiety until your own nervous system is screaming. And then, as you hang up, exhausted and hollow, a thought cuts through the fog like a knife. What if this person doesn't actually want to get better? What if they just want someone to suffer with them? That thought, as uncomfortable as it is what Jung called the emergence of discriminating consciousness. The moment when the empath's intuition turns inward and starts asking the questions that society taught them never to ask. Why am I responsible for this person's healing? Why do I feel guilty for having boundaries? Why does my empathy only seem to flow in one direction? Jung discovered something revolutionary about helpers and healers. He found that many people who dedicate their lives to fixing others are actually running from one thing: themselves. He called this the savior complex, and he recognized it as a sophisticated defense mechanism. If you're busy rescuing everyone else, you never have to face your own unhealed wounds. If you're constantly attending to their emergencies, you never have to sit with your own pain. But when an empath stops fixing others and starts healing themselves, something happens that Jung documented repeatedly in his work. The people around them panic, not because the empath has become cold or cruel, but because unconscious people can sense when someone is no longer available to be used. Your family might say you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. Your friends might accuse you of being selfish for the first time in your life. The people you've been rescuing might suddenly become angry that you're no longer participating in their victim narrative. And here's the question that will reveal everything about where you are in your journey. When someone gets upset because you've set a boundary, do you immediately apologize and explain yourself? Or do you stay quiet and let them sit with their own discomfort? If you've ever been called selfish for finally taking care of yourself, I want you to comment below. I'm healing, not hardening. Because what comes next is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about compassion. Jung spent years studying what he called the wounded healer archetype. These are the people who become therapists, counselors, nurses, coaches, or just the friend everyone calls at 2 in the morning. And what he discovered was disturbing. Most wounded healers never actually heal their own wounds. They just become experts at bandaging everyone else's. This is what I call the empathy paradox. The more you focus on healing others, the more your own pain goes untouched. Jung observed this pattern so frequently that he wrote, "The doctor is effective only when he himself is affected. Only the wounded physician heals." But here's the part that most people skip over. Jung wasn't celebrating wounded healers. He was warning them. He was saying that if you don't heal your own wounds, you'll unconsciously use other people's problems as a distraction from your own inner work. Think about the last time you dropped everything to help someone in crisis. Now ask yourself honestly, what were you avoiding in your own life at that moment? What uncomfortable truth were you running from? What feeling were you not willing to feel? Jung called this projection of the healing function. The empath projects their need for healing onto others and then exhausts themselves trying to heal those external projections, instead of turning inward. I've seen this pattern destroy lives. The empath who's so busy fixing their partner's childhood trauma that they never address their own. The mother who's so focused on her children's emotional needs that she's completely disconnected from her own. The friend who gives such brilliant advice to everyone else but lives in quiet desperation because they never apply that wisdom to themselves. Jung identified the exact moment when this pattern can break. He called it the confrontation with the self. It usually happens after a crisis, a betrayal, a breakdown, or just a moment of exhausting clarity. The empath finally asks the question that changes everything. Who would I be if I stopped trying to save everyone? This question terrifies the empath because their entire identity is built around being needed. But Jung understood that this terror is actually the doorway to what he called individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self, rather than the role you've been playing. For the empath, individuation means something specific and uncomfortable. It means withdrawing your energy from everyone else's drama and redirecting it toward your own healing. Let me be clear about what this looks like in practice. It doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop carrying their emotional weight. It doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become conscious. It doesn't mean you never help anyone. It means you help from choice, not compulsion. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The empath who unconsciously fixes everyone believes they have no choice. They believe it's just who they are. But the empath who becomes conscious realizes they've been living out a trauma response disguised as compassion. And that realization, as painful as it is the beginning of genuine freedom. The empath stops asking, "How can I help you?" and starts asking, "How can I help myself?" Jung discovered that every psychological pattern serves a purpose, even the destructive ones. So what purpose does the empath's compulsion to fix others serve? The answer is protection. Protection from the one thing the empath fears more than anything else: their own inner emptiness. Most empaths grew up in environments where their emotional needs were ignored, dismissed, or punished. Maybe you had a parent who was always in crisis, and you learned early that your job was to manage their emotions, not express your own. Maybe you grew up in chaos, and the only way to feel safe was to become hypervigilant to everyone's moods. Maybe you were praised for being mature, responsible, and selfless, while your actual childhood needs went unmet. Jung called this the adaptation to trauma. The child who cannot change their environment changes themselves instead. They become whatever they need to become to survive. And for many empaths, what they needed to become was useful, helpful, indispensable. Because if you're useful enough, maybe you won't be abandoned. If you're helpful enough, maybe you'll finally be loved. But here's the brutal truth that Jung forced his patients to face. That strategy worked when you were a child. It kept you safe in an unsafe environment. But now you're an adult, and you're still running the same program. You're still trying to earn love through service. You're still trying to prove your worth through sacrifice, and it's killing you. When an empath stops fixing others and starts healing themselves, the first thing they have to confront is this: the void. The emptiness that they've been running from their entire life. Jung called it the encounter with the abyss, and he warned that it's the most terrifying part of psychological development. Because when you stop distracting yourself with everyone else's problems, you have to face your own. You have to feel the loneliness you've been avoiding. You have to acknowledge the anger you've been suppressing. You have to grieve the childhood you never had, the love you never received, the person you could have been if you hadn't spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. This is what I call the empath's dark night of the soul. And it's not a metaphor. It's a real psychological crisis that Jung documented extensively. The empath who withdraws their fixing energy from others suddenly has nowhere to put that energy. They don't know what to do with themselves. They feel useless, purposeless, lost. But Jung understood that this disorientation is actually the birth canal of the authentic self. You can't become who you truly are until you stop being what everyone else needs you to be. The death of the false self always feels like death. Because it is. You're mourning the version of yourself that you performed for survival. The nice one. The helpful one. The one who never had needs of their own. And in that mourning, something new is being born. The real you. The one who's been buried under years of people-pleasing and self-abandonment. The one who has needs, desires, opinions, and boundaries. The one who's been waiting for permission to exist. Jung made a distinction that most modern psychology misses. He separated empathy from what he called participation mystique, a French term he used to describe unhealthy emotional fusion. Real empathy means you can feel with someone without losing yourself in their experience. Participation mystique means you become so merged with another person's emotions that you can't tell where they end and you begin. Most people who call themselves empaths are actually experiencing participation mystique. They're not feeling compassion for others. They're drowning in others' emotions because they never learned how to separate. Jung traced this back to childhood, to what he called the failure of differentiation. Children who grow up in enmeshed or chaotic families never develop a strong sense of self. They learn to read the room, manage the energy, predict the moods, but they never learn to have their own emotional experience separate from everyone else. When an empath stops fixing others, they have to learn differentiation for the first time as an adult. They have to practice saying, "That's your feeling, not mine. That's your problem, not mine. That's your life, not mine." This feels cruel at first, especially to someone who spent their whole life merged with others. But Jung understood that differentiation isn't cruelty. It's maturity. Let me give you a real example of what this looks like. Your sister calls, upset about her marriage again. In the past, you would spend hours absorbing her pain, giving advice trying to fix it. You'd hang up exhausted, anxious, unable to sleep because you're carrying her stress. But now, with conscious differentiation, you listen, you care, but you don't absorb. You might say something like, "That sounds really difficult, and I trust you to figure out what's right for you." And then you let it go. You don't carry it. You don't ruminate. You don't make her problem your problem. This is what Jung called holding space without holding the burden. And it's the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the other person. Because when you stop fixing people, you give them the dignity of solving their own problems. You stop treating them like children who need to be rescued. You start treating them like capable adults who can handle their own lives. But here's where it gets interesting. The people in your life will resist this change violently. They'll say you've become cold. They'll accuse you of not caring anymore. They'll try to guilt you back into your old role. And this is the test. This is where you find out if you're truly healing or just performing a new version of people-pleasing. If someone in your life has ever said you've changed and it didn't feel like a compliment, comment this: "I didn't change, I just stopped pretending." Because what you're about to learn is the difference between being needed and being loved. And that difference will determine the quality of every relationship you have for the rest of your life. Jung called this the cultivation of authentic relating, and it requires something most empaths have never practiced: the willingness to be disliked. Jung identified what he called the moral masochism of the helper. This is the unconscious belief that suffering equals virtue, that the more you sacrifice, the better person you are, that love is measured by how much you're willing to endure. And empaths, more than any other personality type, fall into this trap. You've been conditioned to believe that self-care is selfish, that boundaries are mean, that saying no makes you a bad person. But Jung challenged this entire framework. He asked a question that makes most empaths deeply uncomfortable. What if your endless giving isn't actually love? What if it's fear? Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being unlovable. Fear that if you stop performing service, no one will want you around. Jung called this the neurotic need to be needed, and he recognized it as one of the most destructive patterns in human psychology. Because the person who needs to be needed never actually helps anyone. They just create dependency. Think about the people you've been fixing. Have they actually gotten better, or have they just become more dependent on you? Have your years of advice and support led to their growth? Or have they learned that they can always call you instead of developing their own coping skills? Jung observed this pattern repeatedly. The empath enables exactly what they claim to be healing. This is what I call the fixer's dilemma. Your help isn't helping. Your compassion isn't creating change. Your sacrifice isn't inspiring growth. It's creating learned helplessness in others and resentment in yourself. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And for the empath, accepting yourself completely means accepting this uncomfortable truth. Your fixing is not about them, it's about you. When an empath stops fixing others and starts healing themselves, they have to face their own motivations honestly. Why do I need this person to need me? What do I get from being the savior? How does their dependence serve my ego? These questions are brutal, but Jung insisted they're necessary, because you can't heal a pattern you won't acknowledge. The conscious empath learns to recognize the difference between helping and enabling. Helping empowers. Enabling creates dependency. Helping is temporary. Enabling is chronic. Helping respects boundaries. Enabling violates them. Jung called this discernment, and he believed it was one of the marks of psychological maturity. So what does healthy helping look like? It's time-limited. You help with a specific issue, not someone's entire life. It's reciprocal. Healthy relationships involve mutual support, not one-sided rescue missions. It's boundaried. You help when you have capacity, not when you're depleted. And most importantly, it's conscious. You help because you choose to, not because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. Jung observed that when empaths stop fixing, they often experience what he called identity death. If I'm not the helper, who am I? If I'm not needed, what's my purpose? These questions plunge the empath into an existential crisis. But Jung understood that this crisis is actually an invitation to discover who you are beyond your usefulness. An invitation to find worth that doesn't depend on service. An invitation to build an identity based on being, not doing. Jung spent years studying what he called the transcendent function, the psychological process that allows us to hold tension between opposites. For the healing empath, the tension is this: how do I stay compassionate without losing myself? How do I care without carrying? How do I love without enabling? This tension cannot be resolved through logic. It can only be lived. And living it requires what Jung called conscious suffering. The empath must learn to sit with the discomfort of watching someone struggle without intervening. They must tolerate the guilt of saying no. They must endure the anxiety of not knowing if someone will be okay without their help. This conscious suffering is different from the unconscious suffering the empath has been doing for years. Unconscious suffering is martyrdom. It's the exhaustion of endless giving, the resentment of one-sided relationships, the depletion of carrying everyone's emotions. Conscious suffering is growth. It's the discomfort of setting boundaries, the pain of letting people face their own consequences, the fear of being disliked for finally having needs. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The empath who's waking up feels this pain acutely. Every time they don't answer that desperate text message. Every time they let someone be disappointed in them. Every time they prioritize their own needs over someone else's wants. It hurts, but it's the hurt of healing, not the hurt of harm. Let me tell you what starts to happen when an empath consistently chooses conscious suffering over unconscious martyrdom. First, their energy returns. The chronic exhaustion that's been their baseline for years starts to lift. They sleep better. They have more vitality. Their body stops holding everyone else's stress. Second, their relationships clarify. The people who were using them start to drift away. And that's not a loss, it's a revelation. You finally see who was in relationship with the real you versus who was in relationship with what you could do for them. Jung called this the differentiation of authentic connection from neurotic attachment. Third, their intuition sharpens. When you're not clouded by everyone else's emotions, your own inner knowing becomes clear. You can sense truth from manipulation. You can feel the difference between genuine need and manufactured crisis. You develop what Jung called the discriminating consciousness, the ability to see reality as it is rather than as you wish it were. And fourth, perhaps most importantly, they start to like themselves. For the first time in their life, the empath isn't constantly disappointed in themselves for not doing enough, being enough, giving enough. They start to feel proud of their boundaries. They start to respect their own limits. They start to believe they deserve care, not just the crumbs left over after they've served everyone else. Have you noticed that the people who demanded the most from you offered the least in return? Think about that for a moment, and if it's true, comment this: I was giving 5-star service to people who saw me as a drive-through. Because what happens next is about to shift how you see every relationship in your life. Jung called it the great unmasking, and there's no going back once you see what's been hidden in plain sight. Jung discovered something that modern positive psychology tries to avoid: Real transformation requires what he called the death experience. Something in you has to die for something new to be born. For the empath who's healing, what has to die is the belief that their worth is tied to their usefulness. This death happens in stages. First comes denial. You tell yourself that you're just temporarily tired, that once you rest, you'll go back to being everyone's support system. You convince yourself that setting boundaries is a phase, not a permanent change. You apologize for having needs, as if your own well-being is an inconvenience to others. Then comes anger. Raw, shocking anger at all the people who took advantage of your kindness. Anger at yourself for allowing it. Anger at a society that praises self-sacrifice while calling self-care selfish. Jung understood this anger as the return of the denied shadow, all the rage that the empath suppressed to stay acceptable, likable, safe. This anger is sacred. It's fuel. It's the energy you need to finally stand up for yourself. But Jung warned against acting from this anger impulsively. Instead, he suggested what he called active imagination, consciously dialoguing with your anger to understand its message. Your anger is telling you that you've been violated, used, undervalued. Listen to it. Don't suppress it. But don't let it control you either. After anger comes grief. Deep soul-level grief for all the years you abandoned yourself. For all the times you said yes when you meant no. For all the relationships that were built on your self-neglect. For the life you didn't live because you were too busy managing everyone else's. Jung called this the mourning of the unlived life, and he considered it essential to psychological healing. This grief phase is where many empaths get stuck. They feel so much sadness for their past choices that they can't move forward. But Jung taught a crucial principle. Grief is not meant to be permanent. It's meant to be transformative. You grieve what was lost so you can create what's possible. And then finally comes acceptance. Not acceptance of how others treated you. Acceptance of your own power to change it. Acceptance that you cannot heal the past, but you can choose differently now. Acceptance that setting boundaries will cost you relationships, but keeping your soul is worth the price. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." The healing empath finally understands that their past doesn't determine their future. Their conditioning doesn't control their choices. Their trauma doesn't define their destiny. They can choose differently starting right now. And this choice, this conscious decision to heal themselves instead of fixing others, creates what Jung called the birth of the authentic self. Not the performing self, not the helpful self, not the nice self, the real self, the self that has needs, boundaries, preferences, and the courage to honor them all. This authentic self is both stronger and softer than the false self ever was. Stronger because it's rooted in truth rather than performance. Softer because it no longer needs to defend against its own vulnerability. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of human development is what he called individuation, becoming the unique individual you were meant to be, rather than a copy of collective expectations. For the empath, individuation means something revolutionary. It means giving yourself permission to exist for yourself, not just in service to others. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start including yourself in that care. This doesn't mean you become selfish. It means you become whole. This doesn't mean you abandon others. It means you stop abandoning yourself. The individuated empath develops what Jung called conscious compassion. They can feel deeply without being destroyed by what they feel. They can witness suffering without needing to fix it. They can love powerfully without losing themselves in that love. This is the empath's highest potential, to be both sensitive and sovereign. Jung observed that individuated people change the collective consciousness simply by existing authentically. When you stop participating in dysfunctional dynamics, you give others permission to stop too. When you model healthy boundaries, you show others that boundaries are possible. When you heal yourself instead of fixing others, you demonstrate that real change happens from within. Your healing is not just personal, it's political, it's revolutionary. Because systems of exploitation depend on people like you continuing to give endlessly. The moment you stop, the system loses a worker. And if enough empaths wake up simultaneously, entire structures of codependency collapse. This is what Jung meant when he said, The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. The empath who knows who they are cannot be manipulated into self-abandonment. They cannot be guilted into martyrdom. They cannot be shamed into silence. They stand in their truth regardless of who's uncomfortable with it. So here's what I want you to understand as we close this journey together. Your sensitivity was never the problem. Your lack of boundaries was. Your empathy was never wrong. Your self-abandonment was. Your desire to help was never bad. Your compulsion to fix was. You can be deeply feeling and fiercely boundaried. You can be tender-hearted and strong-backed. You can be compassionate toward others while being devoted to yourself. These are not contradictions. They're the marks of a fully individuated empath. Jung spent his life teaching people how to become whole. And for the empath, wholeness means this. You don't have to save everyone to be valuable. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to be loved. You don't have to carry the world's pain to prove you're good enough. When the empath stops fixing others and starts healing themselves, they don't lose their gift. They reclaim it. They don't become cold. They become clear. They don't stop loving. They start loving wisely. If this journey resonates with your soul, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. What was the moment you realized you needed to stop fixing others and start healing yourself? Your experience might be exactly what another empath needs to hear to begin their own journey. And if you found value in this exploration of Jungian psychology and the empath's path to sovereignty, consider subscribing to this channel. We dive deep into the shadow, the psyche, and the journey to authentic selfhood. Share this video with any empath in your life who's still carrying weight that was never theirs to carry. Thank you, truly, for walking this path with me today. Thank you for your courage to look inward. Thank you for choosing to heal rather than hide. The world needs more conscious empaths like you. Until we meet again, remember this. Your healing is your service. Your boundaries are your love. Your authenticity is your revolution. See you in the next dimension.